Hi, editing Sarah here. Before you get into the new episode of Murder and Psyche podcast, I would just like to make a quick announcement that on our Instagram at Murder Psyche Pod and our Twitter at Murder Psyche, there will be a new segment on there called Mystery Mondays, where we just tell a story about a missing persons case or any sort of mystery. So if you like, you can check that out again on our Instagram and Twitter. Also, the Black Lives Matter movement, it's still going on, along with many other human rights crises. So there will still be links down below in the description. So check that out. Okay, enjoy. Hi, I'm Sarah Lee, and joining me is my co-host
Juliana.
And welcome back to Murder Psyche Podcast if you've been here before, or welcome to Murder Psyche Podcast if you're new. We are a podcast that dives into old and new cases and tries to figure out why the killers did it. We are here for you every week with a new case, and if you would like to recommend any cases, you can check out our Instagram at Murder Psyche Pod, Twitter at Murder Psyche Podcast, or our YouTube channel, Murder and Psyche Podcast. Warning, there are mentions of suicide in this episode. Viewer discretion is advised. Now let's get into the episode. So, let's start off with Marshall Applewhite Jr. So, Marshall was born on May 17th, 1939 in Spur, Texas. He lived with his mother, Louise, his father, Marshall Applewhite Sr., who was a Presbyterian minister, and his sister. Marshall's home life was described as religious, loving, and nomadic. Every few years, Marshall and his family would move into a new community to spread the word of Presbyterianism and help build churches.
Okay, can I just say that the last name Applewhite, it looks like someone just dropped an apple on the floor. I was like, Applewhite, and that was their last name.
What?
That was not a good analogy, but you know what I mean.
I wouldn't mind having the last name Applewhite.
Why Applewhite? Why the Y to that apple?
At least I wouldn't be called a triangle anymore.
Bermuda. I don't know. I kind of like the mysteriousness of the triangle better than Applewhite. I'm supporting her. Okay.
Thank you. Anyways, one man named Floyd Chapman met Marshall in Corpus Christi, mentioned that the Applewhite family built the Parkway Presbyterian Church. I actually wonder if it's still up.
I will find out right now. Continue.
And how Marshall Sr. was the head priest there for a year. In 1948, Marshall graduated from Corpus Christi High School. He wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, who enrolled in Austin College as a philosophy major. Are you looking it up? Is it still up?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
It's still a thing.
So if you like to get into the Presbyterian...
This isn't a sponsor, but if you would like to join their Sunday worship at 11 a.m., they are there. They also have this phone number, which I'm not going to say for legal reasons.
Yeah, let's not. Anyways... So in 1952, Marshall graduated from 1952, Marshall graduated from Austin College and enrolled at the Union Theological Seminary of Virginia in Richmond to take a 3-year course of studies that was to end with him being ordained by a Presbyterian minister. Later this same year, he married a woman named Anne Pierce, and they had 2 children together.
However,
Marshall soon dropped out to pursue music and moved to Gastonia, North Carolina.
interesting.
Very interesting. To become the director of music at the First Presbyterian Church. Churchgoers would say that Marshall was a very charismatic man with a beautiful voice. Ma'am.
There was stuff on it.
In 1954, Marshall was drafted and sent to Salzburg, Austria. I think I'm saying.
Austria?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Along with his family in Austria, he was an instructor in the Army Signal Corps. In 1956, Marshall was honorably discharged and moved to White Sands, New Mexico. During this time, Marshall and his family would continue to move around. In 1968, Anne and Marshall divorced, with Anne taking the children. Also during this time, rumors were circulating about Marshall questioning his sexuality because he was allegedly fired for being in a relationship with a male student. That one was sort of difficult. Some said he was in a relationship, others said he was just having sex.
I think there were accusations of it, but they just knew there was some sexual level to the relationship.
And this was in the 50s. Being gay is bad.
Yeah. That is not good.
That's not good. Anyways, while he worked as a music professor in Houston in 1972, Marshall ended up in a hospital and somehow met Bonnie Nettles. Now let me tell you a little about who Bonnie is. Not much is said about her background or how she grew up. All I know is that Bonnie was born on August 29th, 1927 in Houston, Texas. She grew up in a Baptist household with her mother, father, and I believe 2 sisters. In 1948, Bonnie graduated as a nurse from the Herman Hospital of Professional Nursing. The next year, she married Joseph Nettles, and they had 4 children together. In 1972, Bonnie started studying astrology and the paranormal and started seeing mediums on a weekly basis. Allegedly, Bonnie was constantly in contact with a late 19th century monk called Brother Francis. The mediums told Bonnie that she would meet a man who would change her life and provided a description of the man. Later this year, she met Marshall.
Okay, so I know these 2 are become like partners and shit or whatever, but it's really weird they're like opposite backgrounds. Like she's, well, not opposite, but she's like into mediums and astrology and like the paranormal, and then on the other hand, he's in the church. He's writing music for the church. He's very involved in the church. So combo weird.
Their stories on how they met are different. According to Marshall, he went to the hospital to visit a friend and felt an instant spiritual connection towards Bonnie. However, Bonnie said Marshall ended up in the hospital because he had severe heart troubles and survived. Bonnie thought that meant God saved him for a purpose.
Wait, is Bonnie religious?
They're both religious. Well, she grew up in a Baptist household, but she also believes
in mediums.
And like ghosts and aliens and that sort of stuff.
Okay, that's interesting.
That is very interesting. What was that? Either way, they met in a hospital. Bonnie and Marshall started sharing their religious beliefs. Bonnie had an abiding interest in astrology, while Marshall believed in Gnostic and mystic texts. The 2 of them believed they were the 2 from the Book of Revelations. For those who don't know, the Book of Revelation is the final book in the New Testament of the Christian Bible, from what I was able to understand. It's about a 7-year apocalypse caused by the corruption in churches, and God tests his followers to see if they'll remain loyal in times of turmoil. By the end of the apocalypse, Jesus said to come to earth and rebuild it with his followers by his side, while the non-believers and Satan are thrown into the pool of fire. The 2 refers to the 2 witnesses who Apostle John saw as a vision, believed to be the 2 tormented prophets who were killed for the gift, then resurrected by God and brought to heaven moments before an earthquake destroyed the town. Soon after meeting John, Bonnie divorced Joseph and left him with the kids to travel across the country with Marshall. They started calling themselves Bo and Peep, and later went by Doe and T. So Bonnie was Bo, and Marshall was Peep. And then Doe was Bonnie, and T was Marshall. You get the point?
Yeah.
Since they believed they were so mighty, they believed that the, quote, earthly laws, end quote, didn't apply to them. In 1974, Bonnie and Marshall were arrested for credit card fraud and rental car theft.
What a convenient earthly law to break.
Yes. The credit card frauds charges were dropped, but Marshall spent 6 months in jail for the rental car theft. In jail, Bonnie would visit Marshall often to discuss and refine their new religion. They believed they came from the, quote, level above human, end quote, a physical and literal version of heaven, but in outer space. Which is kind of
mixing very vastly different
concepts together.
Yeah.
And were sent to help others reach this next level. Once out of jail, they started spreading the word of human individual metamorphosis. So this is what their cult was originally called, him. In 1975, Bonnie and Marshall had a conference in Oregon with about 200 people in attendance. Marshall told the crowd that he was, quote, the second coming of Jesus, end quote, and how a UFO would be arriving in a few months to take away its loyal members to the next level. They spread the message about how the human body was just a vehicle and that ascended from this world, people had to separate from all that was human in themselves, including their earthly needs and desires.
Okay, just a note, that isn't such a foreign concept. Like, religion does teach you to not focus on your earthly needs.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for people who are already religious, this isn't that foreign to think about that.
No, but this is like everything that is human, you get rid of. Which is, I guess, a more extreme version?
Yeah, it's a more extreme version of common concepts taught in church.
Mm-hmm. They believed that a UFO would soon take them back to the next level after completing their mission. Many people thought they were loonies, which is insane in general. So dumb.
Sarah!
But they were able to recruit about 20 people from this. All the members were made to leave behind their families and conventional lives to live in extreme poverty. Michael Comiers, I think that's how you say his name, an early recruit, said the appeal of hymn's message was in how they were, quote, talking to my Christian heritage, but in a modern, updated way.
I wouldn't say
quote.
Modern, I would say radical.
Well, to them it was like, it's Christian, but with aliens. So
I guess
they could see that as a modern way.
Well, because we're looking at the lifestyle shift or whatever, and
we've
they're looking
seen the whole story,
yeah,
so we see a radical.
Yeah, but we're looking at like, oh, they just like left their families and went into extreme poverty, and they're like, I'm going to this new way of life, and it's just
a UFO is gonna come pick me up in a few months, Mom.
Yeah, exactly.
Their teachings can be easily explained as Christianity mixed with science fiction. So if you ever wanted to believe in God while also watching Star Trek, this is the religion for you. For example, Heaven's Gate taught that Mary was impregnated by taken up in a spacecraft. This is one of their teachings.
Huh?
So Mary the Virgin was taken up and probed.
I mean, okay.
I mean,
okay.
it's in their religion, so they can believe that if they would like.
Yeah, I know, but I just had to take a moment. Okay.
Soon after, the cult moved to Colorado because there they believed that's where the UFO would pick them up. The cult faced much public scrutiny, so Marshall and Bonnie would keep a low profile while the missionaries went out and spread the word and faced most of the backlash. At their peak, there were 200 members, a part of the cult. Life in Heaven's Gate was very strict and demanding. New recruits had to do the Master Cleanse, which is a mixture of lemonade, cayenne pepper, and maple syrup. And they have to do that for 3 months. So that was the only thing you could consume when you joined the cult for
Cayenne pepper?
Cayenne pepper.
Huh.
So lemonade, cayenne pepper.
So like lemonade, sugary, pepper, at least it's a vegetable, okay?
Maple syrup. And you had to do this for 3 months. You couldn't consume anything else but this for 3 months.
Okay.
Just so that your body could detox.
Okay, I'm just thinking about cayenne pepper.
They had to leave behind their families, money, and take on a new identity so they could no longer go by their old names. All members had to wear baggy clothes and short hair to mask their sexuality, gender, and had to have the same diet. Sex, drinking, and smoking were strictly forbidden. Some men even went as far as to castrate themselves to rid themselves of the temptations and to get on Marshall's good side.
Huh?
So, like, if they felt that they were too tempted to have sex, then they would just surgically castrate themselves. Marshall was also castrated.
Yeah. Of course he is.
Yes. No relationships of any kind were allowed, so no friendships, no marriages, no dating, no hookups. Strictly yourself and just yourself. Lying and breaking the rules were considered major offenses, and no talking about Heaven's Gate to outsiders.
I'm reading.
I know. You can bring your laptop to your face. Go. Once they reached their peak, Bonnie and Marshall started to test their members to only keep their most loyal members. So this was like, you were able to leave the cult. You could give them that.
Yeah.
You could leave if you wanted to. But most of them didn't.
No.
Originally, these tests would just be staying outside all night to await the arrival of the mothership, and once it was morning, Bonnie and Marshall would announce that it was just a test. In the cult, Bonnie and Marshall were seen as equals. Bonnie was the brains, while Marshall was the talker. By the early 80s, the cult started renting out homes. At these homes, they would black out the windows so outsiders couldn't look inside and see what the cult was doing. In 1983, a doctor diagnosed Bonnie with cancer and had to remove one of her eyes because of the cancer, and told Bonnie that she didn't have much time left. However, Bonnie believed that she was immortal, and the doctor was just ignorant, which is kind of ironic because she was a nurse. On June 19th, 1985, Bonnie passed due to the cancer. Bonnie's passing sent Marshall into a downward spiral. Marshall told the cult members that Bonnie had left her body and returned to her home among, quote, the evolutionary level above human, end quote, also known as Tela, where she would continue to help them. This changed their main message that the human bodies were merely vessels, vehicles that were carrying their souls on their journey and could be abandoned at any time. So
this is where it starts to get dark and shifts. Like,
yeah,
they're just bodies. We don't really need them.
Well, before it was like you need it, but like your soul leaves once the mothership beams you up.
Yeah.
And this one is like you can just end it at any time, and
it's fine. Yeah.
I'm genuinely curious about like then the other, like, I'm assuming there probably was a death or two before Bonnie, so how would they describe that?
I don't know. I think a lot of like cult members, like, they're kind of brain dead, and they just kind of go with what the leaders say. And because cults don't tend to be destructive until the leaders make them destructive. So the deaths of like previous people may have not mattered that much to Marshall.
They probably excused it as like, oh, they weren't true.
Or or anything like that. But like, even though like relationships and attachments are like forbidden in this cult, like Marshall was obviously attached to Bonnie. So like when she passed, it snapped something in his brain, and he just told them that, and they just followed him because they're obviously grieving about Bonnie as well.
Yeah.
And they want that closure.
Yeah. So membership in the cult started declining into the early 1990s when the cult rebranded as Total Overcomers Anonymous. They started pulling out ads in the newspaper and on the internet would spread their message and get new members. They also created a successful web design company called Higher Source as a way to make money. With the money from their successful business, they rented out a mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California, so in San Diego. In 1995, the cult became aware of the Hale-Bopp comet and believed it was actually the mothership and Bonnie was on it to help them out. On March 21st, 1997, they ate a Last Supper of sorts at a restaurant. They all ordered the same thing: salads, turkey pot pies, cheesecake with blueberries, and iced tea. On March 26, 1997, 39 bodies were found in the mansion in a mass suicide situation. All the members were found laying in their bunk beds, wearing black tracksuits with black Nike sneakers and a purple blanket covering them. They also had an arm patch saying, quote, "Heaven's Gate away team," end quote. Next to them was their IDs and whatever remaining cash they had. It's believed that in groups of 15 in the span of 3 days, the members were given either chocolate pudding or applesauce laced with barbiturates and chased it down with vodka. Laid down in their bunk beds, tied plastic bags over their head, and laid the purple blankets over themselves. The mass suicide was talked about everywhere and was considered the worst mass suicide since the Jonestown Massacre, which that was a mass murder-suicide.
Yeah, that's a lot to take in. It's more of a... It turned really dark because, to be honest, there's a lot of cults. Like, a lot. And they're more just defined as, like, just all people having similar ideologies. And because they have these similar ideologies and looking at it the same, it's what they believe. They, specifically in this one, they devote religious veneration and devotion towards a figure or object, and in this case it was like the ideology of like a mixture of alien type UFO with Christianity, I guess, and they use these ideologies typically in cults to transcend the finality of life, because that's what I think this cult was scared of, is like death. Because they're trying to transcend death by saying there's something after this, and we know this because when we do this, this will happen and we'll be okay. I mean, specifically within this cult, people who believe in, like, in some degree of like a mixture of aliens and Christianity might find this a more accepting community of their beliefs, because like if I started talking about it, I was like, oh yeah, aliens and Jesus, you might be like, huh? You know? And maybe these people do believe it, but they get negative reactions from their community, and so going to this cult validates their beliefs to some degree. recruitment is typically, they promise the best up front. It's like a sales pitch anyway.
Yeah.
And in being part of this cult, you get offered to the next level. Typically, the way that they target people, and in the Heaven's Gate, Bonnie was the mastermind. I have a feeling she made up a lot of the stuff that the cult followed or practiced, and then John did a lot of the.
He was a salesman.
He's a very charismatic salesman, so he did a lot of the recruitment probably, except when they were in hiding for a bit. But so it's about picking vulnerable people and the right people, and love bombing them, which is a concept of like when they first enter the cult, you're very like loving of them, accepting of them, you give them food, you promise them all this stuff, like very gracious.
Yes.
Whereas like before isolating them, isolating was the biggest part, because that's the thing in the cult where it's like taking them away from their family. Like that's most important, because you can't convince someone completely of something unless they have no other perspective or resources to back up.
Well, these people were also very smart too, so it was like, we were like, how could they be this dumb?
Yeah, no, actually being part of a cult or even like situations like this, intelligence doesn't have an influence on it. Like it doesn't actually matter. Like there are many cults and participants of cults and cult members that are highly intelligent and very educated. The microphone's making me.
Yeah.
And they're still part of cults, even if it is a destructive cult like this one. So intelligence really doesn't have a lot to do with it. But basically, the consequences of being in these cults is great. Even former members, like coming out of it, they have to seek therapy, but they are more susceptible to depression, guilt, fear, paranoia. They have slow speech for some reason, because I guess it changes their pathology a bit, where they're more of a follower than they are a leader, and they tend to just listen more instead of talk. They tend to be indifferent to physical appearance, which is interesting, because it doesn't matter as much to them in a social situation.
Well, they all looked generally the same. They all wore the same baggy clothes and the same haircut.
And with cults, typically the leader, which is two leaders in this case, they manipulate people consciously through systematic social influences. So by isolating them, they can put them in controlled situations where they can influence them socially, which is it's actually not as hard to do as you would think, because putting your new members in a room with all people who think the same way as you do, and like giving them social situations and like introducing them to concepts, and only having this one uniform perspective, it's very easy to be influenced to believe the ideas to some degree.
Yeah,
if that makes any sense. And especially if you're not talking or watching the news, or like have your family there to be like, like, you know,
or just some other influence in your life that is like, that is so stupid, don't do that.
Yeah. And individualism is not encouraged. It's about you making your identity invalid, like not invalid, but just like not important. So like when you talk to people, it's not about sharing your opinion, it's about having the same opinion.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of what people struggle with when they get out of cults. And in this case, especially with Heaven Gates, especially when they like isolated themselves and lived in the country or getting in homes and blacking out windows and stuff, it's an us versus them mentality against people who don't follow what they believe. They're like, you can't be associated with them because we only know. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of them, specifically, I don't know if they did this, but it's very common in cults where they do phobia indoctrination, which is basically saying like playing on people's irrational fears to make them more likely to believe in what you're preaching. If that makes any sense. So like if you for some reason this is just like a weird example, but like you were like terrified of spiders or something like that. They would use that and like somehow apply it to what they believe to make you more likely to believe, oh, I'm safe against spiders.
Yeah.
Now that I'm
in this cult, they can't fuck. We will record that later.
That is all.
That is all?
This is bloopers. I really hope that saved.
It probably will. Continue with your analysis for the video.
For the video, I might have to redo this. This is gonna sound really bad. Which is okay. I know I talked about earlier, like there's so many cults or whatever. Al Qaeda is considered a cult.
Yeah.
It's considered a destructive cult because it's like, it's weird to think about it that way because they are also a terrorist group, but they are considered I love how you're still holding. They're
just for the effect of it.
They're considered a terrorist group, but they're very much so a cult, as they like brainwash, especially at young ages. It's easy to do and stuff. Into this ideology that they have to kill people or they have to commit terrorist actions in order to belong in this group or achieve what they're giving, if that makes any sense. And cults, okay, typically cults are always looked in a negative light, and there's a good reason for that, like massacre, mass genocide, like, or even a mass suicide, like, it's just a very negative situation, and it doesn't seem like there's anyone who's in part of that is anything but psychotic. But a lot of studies are like, it's a lot more complicated than that. It's a lot of, some people choose to become members of cults because they're escaping something a lot worse in their life.
Yeah.
Especially in situations like younger kids are more likely to join cults just because they may have more issues escaping other like home lives, abusive home lives. And sometimes it's easier to be a part of a cult where they have a home for you that's much better than your abusive home life.
Yeah.
Or you're running from drugs. Maybe you've gotten involved with drugs, and it's just easier to hide out in this cult and be a part of the accepting community that you feel like is family than and it's
or just running away from any sort of temptations in the world.
And temptations, yeah. But this is more likely more cults. The reason people join cults is not more of like they completely believe in the cult, but more of like the cult solves some of their spiritual, economic, and like social issues that they have. And so they feel like what they're sacrificing to join the cult is less or not as bad as what they're running away from. Yeah. As what is being solved with them joining the cult. Even if more problems arise from being in the cult, they feel like the problem that the cult is solving is more important than the problems that arise when they're in the cult. And so that's a lot of what psychologists are studying right now. It's just like it's not a matter of intelligence. It's not a matter of like you're a psychopath if you join a cult. It's just it's more of a regular decision than you think. Like people who join cults think about stuff the same way we make a decision every morning. Like really freaky to me, but like,
well, yeah, to us it seems odd because we're not actually in a cult.
Yeah, but we're in a cult, but we're not in
our friend group is called a cult,
but we're not a cult.
We're not in a cult.
We don't even have guidelines.
No, we don't.
We don't. Okay.
Anyways,
but basically the takeaway from this is that it's people will believe in whatever if they feel like they have a safe place. And solving some of those issues, and even though it does have really bad results or whatever and can result in being very destructive, some cults aren't this destructive, and it's just about being accepted in a social circle. That's really weird to think about. And the manipulative leaders, like honestly, no one likes them.
Well, I can understand wanting to be accepted in a social circle. I think anyone wants to, any regular human being. I think it's elevated a little bit when it comes to a cult.
Well, it'd be different because it's not just the members being like, we have this vulnerability or this insecurity. It's the leaders feeding off of humanistic desires, like being accepted or running away from something that's scary to them, or it's the cult leaders being manipulative. Like the cult leaders are really the worst, the worst people in the situation. They are the ones that make it destructive. If the leader doesn't want it to be destructive, it's not.
Yeah, because originally they didn't want suicide was something they were against.
Yes.
And then once Bonnie died, they were like, well, you can leave your vehicle.
Yeah, so it's more about the leaders. The psyche of the leaders is really messed up. And in this case, it's hard to psychologically analyze Bonnie and John because they seem like very...
Marshall, you mean?
Marshall.
There you
I had
go.
a brain fart. I need to look at the thing.
Yeah, it was Bonnie and Marshall.
Bonnie and Marshall or whatever. It's because I did look at their psyche a little bit, but they are very normal people for this time, being a part of the church, having families, like moving around a little bit because that's just how your financial situation works, like,
or just to spread the word of
spreading the word of God, like that's something very normal for that time and even this time now. So it's really hard to say like what set them off or what connected them initially, but the point is just like the leaders of the cult, because he went psychotic, it made everyone suffer for it, because what he goes says, or what he says goes.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, I know words. Okay, that is all.
That is all?
That is all. That was my...
If you would like to check out anything we discussed today, please check out our Instagram and Twitter. Over there will be our sources, photos, and additional material. Have a lovely rest of your day. Stay safe, and we will see you next time. Bye!